Well, thanks for being with us today on the Extra Point Podcast here on Arizona's Family. We are closing in on opening day to the 2022 Major League Baseball season. So pleased to be joined by the Arizona Republic Major League Baseball Diamondbacks beat writer Nick Piecoro. We both started covering baseball right around the same time, 2006, here in Arizona. He's one of my favorite reads here in this town, and I think one of the best baseball voices in the country. Time to talk about how the Diamondbacks will fare in 2022. How many years is this now for you covering the Diamondbacks?
I think it's 15.
Got here in 06, so I think we were.
Yeah.
Was that your first year?
I was just starting as a backup. Maybe at the end of 05, I was starting as a backup to Bob McManaman.
Wow. So was this always the goal from when you were a kid to be a baseball writer?
Yeah. Once I realized I wasn't good enough to play, that was what I wanted to do.
What's the best what's the best moment from your playing career though? Is there one? You were at what, like Ironwood High School? Is that right?
I wasn't good enough to play in high school even. I mean, I got word pretty quickly. I realized pretty fast that it wasn't going to happen. So I don't know. I mean, I was like a second baseman who like had no arm and, could field the routine ground ball and, usually could make decent contact, but I'm sure it will come as very little surprise. I didn't have a whole lot of pop.
Well, there's still time, man. Just that was during the performance enhancing drugs era, so maybe.
Well, I hadn't learned how to add loft to my swing, so maybe with the launch angle stuff, maybe I sold myself short back then.
Well, how much has the game even changed since 05, 06 when you kind of landed? That was right in the middle of the Jason Grimsley news and what Brandon Webb won the Cy Young. I remember I came to town and I was straight out of Spokane covering rookie ball and I got plugged right into covering the majors. And it was crazy. I still can't even believe that it happened. What was it like those first couple years, just, cause you're from here covering the Diamondbacks?
Yeah. I think it was a little bit intimidating at first. Mainly because it was a lot more of a veteran group. So, I mean, it was kind of the end of the Luis Gonzalez era. Craig Counsell was still there. I mean, there were a lot of guys that were just older players that I had gone from watching on TV or having their baseball cards or something to guys that I'm suddenly asking questions of in the clubhouse. I think it got easier for me a couple of years later when that next wave of prospects started popping up, guys like Stephen Drew and Connor Jackson and Carlos Quentin and Miguel Montero and guys that were kind of more in the same age bracket as me. And I kind of was able to just sort of be like, oh yeah, that's just some other dude. There's nothing mystical about them. It's just another guy. So it became a lot less intimidating for me.
So what, if this is your 16th year, then what do you expect to see? What are you most looking forward to about this summer?
Well, I mean, coming off of 110 losses, obviously I don't think that expectations from like a win-loss perspective are super high, but I mean, like every season, there's always stuff that's going to be interesting to monitor. Just how is this newest wave of Diamondbacks prospects going to do? They're going to have a few more of them start to move up this year, I'm sure. And one in Geraldo Perdomo is going to make the opening day roster, it looks like. So I think, we'll get a better sense of where this kind of, they haven't used the word rebuild, but clearly they're kind of doing that, kind of where this rebuild stands by the end of the year. I think I've written about this. I think it's always interesting to see how, how ownership reacts and responds to these sorts of things. And they seem to have a lot of support right now with this group, but it's not hard to envision some things going wrong, or maybe instead of going wrong, not going right away, which is probably a better way of putting it with young players in baseball. Sometimes it takes time, and seeing that ownership group react in a negative way to that sort of thing.
With the group, with Mike Hazen and Torey Lovullo, I mean, it has been 2 solid years here, tough to watch. And I mean, as much as this has been a Suns town and that's been fun, and a Cardinals town, I love the pace of baseball in this town because it gets hot. Everybody just kind of turns on the ball game. You don't have as much going on. How long do you feel like that leash is right now, and how much of it has been by design that, hey, you're not going to compete with the Dodgers right now, so tear it to the ground?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing though, is they've kind of refused to tear it to the ground, right? I mean, they continue to carry rosters with Madison Bumgarner and David Peralta and Nick Ahmed, and even after they let Goldschmidt and Pollock and Corbin go, either by trade or free agency after the 18 season, they continued to try to contend. So they've tried to do a really difficult thing. They're trying to, in baseball, people like to use the phrase thread the needle. It's just really hard to both rebuild and be competitive at the same time. So, I mean, I think that when you look at like how much of a leash do those guys deserve, I do think it's fair to cut them some slack because they're trying to do something that, not that it's never been done, but like, the Brewers have kind of pulled it off in the last 5-10 years. The Rays kind of pulled it off. Oakland had tried to avoid it, but they've had to tear down here recently. It's just kind of the way that it goes for most teams is you have to tear down to end up having that up cycle again. Listening to Derek Hall talk the other day, I did a little Q&A session with him recently. He sounds like he has total faith, and ownership is willing to give a long leash to this group. But again, like I said, I'm curious to see how it plays out if things kind of start to go sideways a little bit again this year, especially after what we saw last year.
Can you make a case though with the arms and the starting rotation, and you have Melanson and Kennedy there, both guys that have closed games, that they can be in this? I mean, we always just say if you're not going to be good, just be relevant until Cardinal training camp. And if you're going to be good, that makes the fall really fun. But the trading deadline, could you make a case that this team is going to be able to keep itself in ball games with its pitching?
I guess you could. I don't know that they have quite the depth to be able to make that argument really legitimately, especially when you look around the rest of the National League and some of the clubs that have built up around them. But look, yeah, if Madison Bumgarner, and we're not even asking him to get back to his old, top of the rotation self, but is kind of more the mid rotation type of workhorse that he was for times last season. If Zach Gallen gets healthy, stays healthy, makes 30 starts, and is the guy that he was in 2019, 2020. It's a little, Merrill Kelly, I think is a pretty dependable arm. After that, it's a little dicey. Zach Davies is coming off of a really bad year. Luke Weaver has never been consistent. They do have a wave of pitching prospects that are coming. I don't know that anybody could really bank on those guys immediately stepping in and dominating and helping, carry the team. The bullpen, again, I mean, you mentioned Melanson, Ian Kennedy. Those are veteran guys that gives you some sense of stability. But that's a unit that just kind of lacks dominance. It doesn't have a lot of like dominant stuff, guys with really good arms, especially when you compare it to some other teams, including the Dodgers in the division, where you've got like 3-4 guys that pump 95 to 100 and can just overpower hitters, which is kind of the name of the game a lot of times for bullpens these days. But look, yeah, I mean, they have some guys that have done it before in the big leagues. If it all comes together, maybe it works out. It's sort of like, you have to kind of think of it in terms of like having a big, long parlay bet or something, right? If this happens, if that happens, like, yeah, it could happen. And maybe you're sitting there at the window dreaming on it. But like the reality is those parlays give you crazy odds for a good reason.
Torey Lovullo's lineup card that he gets to fill out every day, I don't know that that's going to really spark fear into the National League here, all of baseball. How creative do you think he will get day in and day out filling out that lineup card?
Yeah, that's a good point. I feel better about the lineup than I do about the pitching. I just think it's a pretty decent group of guys if it stays healthy. Maybe I'm higher on some of these players. I mean, I think Dalton Varsho's last couple months, I know nobody in the Valley was paying attention last season, and rightfully so. But his last couple months were really good. That seems like a guy that's kind of on the verge of a breakout and could be a really good player. We all know what Ketel Marte can do. I think Geraldo Perdomo, who I mentioned earlier, who's probably going to get the starting shortstop job while Ahmed is down. We'll see how long that lasts. And if they have to make a tough decision at some point, I kind of wonder if they will, because I think Perdomo's a really interesting player. He's added some power to his game. He's always had a really good approach. He's a slick fielder. I think it's a guy that has a chance to be a good player. David Peralta looks really good this spring. His swing looks cleaner, more direct, just less moving parts. And we all know that he's been a good hitter in the past. Carson Kelly was on the verge of a breakout last year before he got hurt. I just feel like there's a lot more. It's a little easier for me to kind of see this as a competitive lineup day in and day out. I just feel like there's a chance that I don't think they're going to be a top 5 offense in the National League. I don't even know if they'll be, above average, but I think they'll be decent. I think they'll be competitive, and I think they're going to put guys in better positions this year to pick up the ball cleanly. Whereas last year they're kind of stretching guys all around and trying to create versatility where maybe it wasn't there.
When you look at different teams that have risen up, when you catch an up wave in 2011 and 2017, and teams have been built, and it was kind of crazy with Dave Stewart. I mean, even Kevin Towers, it was like all the expectations were there. The team didn't perform. The guy would leave. The team would do good, and it didn't make any sense. Where would you say this franchise is on the way back up?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you have to feel pretty good about it because of where they are relative to other teams in the industry. It seems as though this is a really good farm system. If you kind of trust the prospect hounds that are out there ranking farm systems, the Diamondbacks are top 5, top 10 in all of them, all of those rankings. They have a collection of pitching prospects. A bunch of them got to Double-A last year. Some of them were in high A. That how it works. I mean, you need 7 to 10 guys that have a chance to start games to get usually 2, maybe 3 of them to actually pan out. And they have those kind of numbers now where they never did in the past, I don't think. And I think what's different about this group is that there's some legitimate power stuff among them. There's guys that have, sit 95 or higher with their fastballs that kind of give you, even more of a fallback too, where you can see someone maybe turning into a dominant 8th or 9th inning type of guy. I think when you think back to those teams that surprised, they were coming off of disappointing seasons that were expected to be really good, right? Last year really wasn't the case with the Diamondbacks. So I think it's a little bit more of a starting over point for them. I don't think it's realistic to expect the kind of bounce back because in 2017, remember 2016 was the year they traded for Greinke and Shelby Miller and fell flat. So they kind of just changed the pieces around and it kind of took off and had the kind of season they were hoping in 16. This year, it's a little bit more of like, a little bit more of a true rebuild, I would say, where there are still some good players, some interesting players, but I don't know that we can really expect it to come together quickly. Now, there are reasons to think that they're on the right track. They have a group of pitchers in Double-A, probably, and some of them were in high A as well, probably 7 to 10 guys that you can kind of reasonably expect, or that scouts reasonably expect to have a chance to start in the big leagues. When you have that kind of group, you need those kinds of numbers to get 2 or 3 of them to actually pan out. And then you look at the position player side, scouts see guys all up and down the system that have a chance to be everyday position players. Now, it just doesn't usually work in baseball where guys suddenly come up and boom, they're established big leaguers and they're productive big leaguers. I mean, we saw it with Dalton Varsho the last couple of years where 300 at bats into his career, it didn't look good. And then suddenly, boom, something clicked and now it kind of looks like he's ready to break out. So, I mean, I think like if things go the way that they envision, it's reasonable to think that in, 2-3 years, you're looking at a team that has a chance to compete, maybe a little bit longer time horizon than that. But like I use the word compete, get into the 80s or so, play meaningful games in September. And, if Corbin Carroll turns out to be, the star outfielder that they think he could be, or Jordan Lawler turns out to be the slugging infielder they think, then, suddenly they've got those pieces they can build around to contend with the big boys in the division.
And where can people follow you all season long? Will you be more on Twitter, more on AZ Central, more on Instagram? What's kind of your strategy for covering the team this year?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of just try to focus everything at our website at AZ Central. I mean, I'll tweet out the links to my stories, and that's at Nick Piecoro. But I try to keep most of my content there at the site and direct people that way.
Is your plant game looks like it's on point as well? Is that like the second? Do you do any writing about plants?
I do not, but I appreciate that. I'll pass it along to the person in the household who takes great care of those. She has a history of actually having things work out the wrong way when it comes to plants, and killing more of them than thriving. But I will let her know you like what you're seeing.
It's like 300 bats in the big leagues. Like, you just need a little time.
That's one way of putting it. I'll try to remind her of that. Although it's been a lot longer than 300
If those
bats,
plants don't have names behind you, I'm going to name one Dalton and the other Varsho. We're going to watch it take off.
Sounds good, Mark. Hey, thanks for having me on.
The Extra Point Podcast is a production of 3TV, CBS 5, and azfamily.com in Phoenix, Arizona.